You are lying in bed right now, or maybe you will be tonight. The room is cool, maybe 65 degrees Fahrenheit, because at some point you Googled the perfect sleep temperature, and your thermostat has obeyed ever since. The sheets are clean, the pillow is shaped to your neck, a fan hums in the corner, or an air conditioner breathes behind the wall, and your body does something it has been preparing for all evening. It drops its core temperature by about 1 to 2 degrees. Blood rushes to the vessels in your hands and feet to dump heat away from your organs, and you drift off. It is effortless, automatic, and barely worth thinking about. Now, rewind 200,000 years. You are lying on a thin mat of grass inside a shallow rock shelter in what is now the Lebombo Mountains of South Africa. There is no fan. There is no breeze. The stone around you is still radiating the heat it absorbed all day. And the air is so thick and warm, it feels like breathing through a damp cloth. Every insect within 100 yards has found you, and your body still needs to do the exact same thing it does tonight. It must cool itself down enough to let your brain shut off and sleep. Except, nothing in your environment is cooperating. So, the question is simple. For hundreds of thousands of years, with no air conditioning, no fans, no refrigeration, and no synthetic fabrics, how did human beings sleep when it was simply too hot to sleep at all? The answer starts with nothing you will never see in a fossil: your skin. Specifically, the 2 to 4 million tiny eccrine sweat glands embedded in it. Humans have more of these than any other primate on Earth. Most mammals cool themselves by panting, which only works so fast. But somewhere between 2 and 3 million years ago, as your ancestors moved out of shaded forests and onto the open savannas of East Africa, evolution pulled off one of its most radical trades. It swapped fur for sweat. A 2018 study led by Andrew Best at the University of Massachusetts Amherst examined the evolution of eccrine glands across primates. They concluded that humans developed a dramatically higher density of these glands, up to 550 per square centimeter on the palms alone, as a direct response to sustained heat exposure in open environments. Your ancestors did not just endure the heat, they became the most thermally efficient large mammals on the planet. But here is what textbooks rarely tell you about that evolutionary trade. Losing body hair was not just about daytime survival, it was a primitive sleeping technology. Fur traps heat against the skin. Without it, your body becomes a living radiator. Heat pours off your exposed skin into the air around you, especially at night when the environment finally cools even just a few degrees. By around 1.2 million years ago, a variant in the MC1R gene had spread across human populations. This was a change that promoted darker, melanin-rich skin, which only makes sense if the body was already largely hairless and needed ultraviolet protection. The nakedness came first. And that nakedness did not just help your ancestors run down prey under the midday sun, which is the famous persistence hunting theory championed by Harvard biologist Daniel Lieberman. It also helped them bleed heat into the darkness every single night, turning their own bodies into the first cooling system they ever owned. But your biology can only do so much. Think about that for a second. You can sweat, you can radiate heat, but if the air around you is just as hot as your skin, there is nowhere for that heat to go. This is the problem that haunted every warm climate human ancestor for millennia. And it is the reason they did not just survive the heat, they engineered around it. The oldest evidence of that engineering was found inside Border Cave, that same rock shelter in the Lebombo Mountains on the border of South Africa and Eswatini. In 2020, archaeologist Lynn Wadley of the University of the Witwatersrand published a landmark study in the journal Science. It documented grass bedding dated to approximately 200,000 years ago. This is the oldest known sleeping construction on Earth. The beds were made from broadleaf grasses layered over a foundation of ash. Ash, not dirt, not sand, but ash from previously burned bedding, deliberately maintained and relayered over generations. The ash served two incredibly vital purposes. First, it created a dry, insulating barrier between the sleeper and the heat-retaining ground. Second, it dehydrated crawling insects. Ticks, lice, and anything that burrowed into the grass would choke because the microscopic ash particles clogged their breathing apparatus. Mixed into this ancient bedding were traces of camphor bush, a plant still used in rural East Africa today as an airborne insect repellent. These were not accidental arrangements. They were architectural and pharmaceutical. Here's the part modern humans forget. The ground itself was the enemy. Rock and packed earth absorbed solar radiation all day. After sundown, they release it slowly, exactly like a hot cast iron pan pulled from the oven. If you have ever walked barefoot on black asphalt at dusk, you have felt this. The surface is still warm hours after the sun disappears. Your ancestors could not escape that thermal reservoir, but they could separate themselves from it. A foot-thick mat of dry grass over a layer of ash created a pocket of air between the body and the baking ground. Air is a terrible conductor of heat. That pocket functioned exactly the way modern fiberglass insulation does. Not by generating cold, but by blocking heat transfer. 200,000 years ago, in a cave in southern Africa, someone figured that out. We do not know their name. We never will. But they invented the bed, and the original bed was a thermal tool. Yet even with bedding, and even with naked, sweat-efficient skin, the heat still won on the absolute worst nights. And that is when your ancestors used their most powerful cooling technology of all, time itself. A 2015 study led by Gandhi Utish, working with UCLA neuroscientist Jerome Siegel, tracked the sleep patterns of 3 present-day hunter-gatherer groups whose lifestyles closely mirror ancestral conditions: the Hadza of Tanzania, the San of Namibia, and the Tsemen of Bolivia. What they found completely upended the modern assumption that ancient humans slept from sundown to sunrise. They did not. The average sleep duration across all 3 groups was just 6.4 hours per night, which is less than most people in industrialized countries get today. More importantly, the onset of sleep did not correspond to darkness. It corresponded to temperature. In all 3 groups, people fell asleep as the ambient temperature was falling, and they woke up near the coldest point of the night, typically just before dawn. They were not sleeping through the dark. They were sleeping through the cool. In the summer, when temperatures stayed elevated late into the evening, sleep onset was later and sleep duration was shorter, nearly an hour less than in winter. The body was essentially waiting for permission from the air. When the temperature finally dipped low enough for core cooling to begin, sleep became possible, not a single moment before. But this raises a massive question. If you're sleeping less on the hottest nights, doesn't that create a biological problem? You still need rest. You still need the memory consolidation and neural repair that happened during deep sleep. How did they get enough? The answer is that your ancestors almost certainly did not sleep the way you do, in one long, uninterrupted block. Historian A. Roger E. Kirch of Virginia Tech spent 16 years combing through pre-industrial European documents. He found over 500 historical references to a first sleep and a second sleep. These were 2 distinct phases of roughly 4 hours each, separated by a wakeful period of 1 to 2 hours in the middle of the night. This was not insomnia. It was the human default. People would wake up, tend the fire, talk quietly, maybe check on their animals, and then return to a second sleep that lasted until morning. In blisteringly hot climates, this segmented pattern would have been even more pronounced. The first sleep might come in the late evening as temperatures finally dropped. The wakeful period might coincide with the deepest hours of the night. This was the coolest window, when you could drink water, move to a better spot, or simply lie still and let your skin radiate heat into the colder air. Then, the second sleep would carry you to dawn. And crucially, they did not do any of this alone. In 2017, anthropologist David Sampson of the University of Toronto studied the Hadza people and discovered something absolutely remarkable. Over 20 days of continuous monitoring with wrist-worn accelerometers, there were only 18 total minutes in which every member of the tribe was asleep at the same time. Let that sink in. 18 minutes of collective sleep out of 20 entire nights. At any given moment during the dark hours, a median of 8 people were awake. The variation was not random. It was driven by differences in human chronotypes, which is our natural biological tendency to sleep earlier or later. Older members of the tribe tended to sleep and wake earliest. Younger members stayed up the latest. The result was a rolling wave of wakefulness that covered nearly every minute of the night. Sampson called it the poorly sleeping grandparent hypothesis. Your grandmother's insomnia is not a disorder. It is a 2-million-year-old security system. This means extreme heat did not just change when your ancestors slept. It changed how they slept and who was sleeping at any given time. The human group functioned like a single organism, constantly cycling through rest and alertness, never fully unconscious and never fully vulnerable. The person who woke up at 2 in the morning, drenched in sweat, was not failing at sleep. They were succeeding at survival. They were alert during the most dangerous hours, able to scan for predators, tend a dying fire, or check on a restless child. The heat that woke them was, in a strange evolutionary way, keeping the entire tribe alive. As human cultures grew more complex, the built environment began answering the heat too. The Sumerians of ancient Mesopotamia, the world's first city builders roughly 5,000 years ago, in modern-day Iraq, designed their homes with flat rooftops and open courtyards. They did this specifically because summer nights indoors were unlivable. Families cooked on the roof, ate on the roof, and slept on the roof where they were fully exposed to the open sky. This was not desperation. It was physics. A clear night sky acts as an enormous heat sink, The ground and everything on it radiates infrared energy upward into the freezing vacuum of space. Without walls and ceilings to trap that radiation, exposed surfaces can cool to temperatures several degrees below the ambient air. The Sumerians did not know the modern scientific term radiative cooling, but they knew that sleeping under the stars was colder than sleeping under a roof, and they built entire architectural traditions around that knowledge. The Egyptians took it even further. In ancient Thebes, where summer temperatures routinely exceeded 110 degrees Fahrenheit, people slept on rooftops with wet reed mats hung across windows and doorways below. This cooled any air that moved through the house. They placed water-filled clay pots on the floor, acting as primitive evaporative coolers. The ancient Persian city of Yazd, in modern-day Iran, developed the bad deer. This was a massive wind-catching tower, some dating back over 1,000 years, that funneled moving air downward into living spaces. A well-built bad gear could lower interior temperatures by as much as 50 degrees Fahrenheit compared to the scorching outside air. These were not mere luxuries. These were advanced sleep technologies designed by people who understood a fundamental rule. If you cannot cool the body, you must cool the air around it. And if you cannot cool the air, you must move your body to where the air is already cool. Now, pull back and look at the full picture. Your ancestors faced a nightly engineering problem that would completely stump most modern people if you took away their electricity. A human body that requires a drop in temperature to initiate sleep, trapped in an environment that outright refuses to cool down. And they answered this problem on every conceivable level. They answered it with biology, shedding fur, multiplying sweat glands, and turning bare skin into a heat-radiating surface that evolution spent 2 million years perfecting. They answered it with materials, laying down dry grass and ash beds that separated their bodies from the baking thermal mass of the earth. They answered it with timing, shifting their sleep to track the temperature curve, breaking rest into segments, and letting the absolute coldest hours of the night do what no technology could. They answered it with community, distributing wakefulness across the group so that no one slept too deeply in the dangerous dark. And they answered it with architecture, lifting their sleeping bodies toward the open sky, channeling wind through towers, and hanging wet reeds in doorways. Every single one of those ancient biological solutions is still inside you right now. Your body still drops its temperature before sleep. Your hands and feet still flush with blood to vent heat. This is a mechanism so powerful that researchers at the University of Basel found that the rate of warming in your hands and feet is the single strongest predictor of how quickly you will fall asleep tonight. You are still underneath the smart thermostat, the memory foam, and the modern climate control, a tropical primate. Your ancestors solved the problem of hot nights so completely that you forgot it was ever a problem in the first place. Tonight, you will climb into bed. The air will be cool. The sheets will be smooth. You will barely think about it. But somewhere deep in the architecture of your sleep, in the way your core temperature drops, in the way your blood moves to your skin, and in the way you wake up briefly at 3 in the morning for no reason you can name, 200,000 years of restless sweating. Ingenious ancestors are still lying awake beside you. They never did get a perfect night's sleep. They just made sure you could.